Under the soft gleam of the Los Angeles skyline, where glass towers reflected the glow of ambition and beauty, a storm was quietly gathering within the walls of Forrester Creations. What had once been a sanctuary of family legacy and creative genius was now becoming a battlefield of suspicion, pride, and fear. And at the heart of it all was one name: Luna. The rumors of her early release from prison had spread like wildfire through the fashion world, carried by whispers in conference rooms and murmured conversations at the Forrester mansion. But no whisper burned more fiercely than the one echoing inside Steffy Forrester's mind. Luna's return, to Steffy, wasn't just gossip. It was a threat, a shadow creeping toward everything she had fought to preserve. Steffy had built her identity on strength. She was Ridge's daughter, yes, but she was also the woman who had held Forrester Creations together when the tides of scandal, love affairs, and betrayal had nearly torn it apart. Every decision she made was a negotiation between loyalty and control, and she had long believed that only those who understood the weight of the Forrester name deserved to wear it. Luna, in her eyes, had forfeited that right the moment she betrayed the company and the family who had given her everything. Her imprisonment had been, to Steffy, not merely justice but closure. And yet now, the world seemed intent on reopening wounds that had only just begun to heal. The reports were unconfirmed at first. Someone claimed to have seen Luna escorted out of a correctional facility under medical supervision. Another source mentioned a pregnancy. The words sounded absurd, but the more Steffy tried to dismiss them, the more they haunted her. Who was the father? How had Luna managed to manipulate the system so easily? And more importantly, what would she want now that she was free? Steffy's instincts screamed that Luna would not simply vanish into obscurity. She had always been ambitious, always burning for recognition, even when it led her to cross lines no one else dared. Forrester Creations, in Luna's eyes, was not just a place of work, it was the symbol of everything she had lost. By the time Steffy stormed into Ridge's office, her decision was already made. She wanted Luna erased from every record, every royalty agreement, every corner of Forrester that still bore her name. She wanted her father to officially sever all ties. Ridge, seated behind the mahogany desk that had witnessed decades of family drama, looked up at his daughter with calm eyes that carried the fatigue of too many wars fought within these same walls. He had expected this confrontation. "We can't rewrite the past," he said softly, his voice steady but heavy. "Luna made mistakes, yes, but she was gifted, Steffy. She had a vision that transformed our brand in ways we couldn't deny." That single sentence felt like betrayal. To Steffy, it was not a statement of compassion but of weakness. She saw in her father's defense of Luna the same pattern she had seen her entire life, the tendency of the men in her family to forgive beauty, to excuse talent, to rationalize destruction. It was Brooke all over again, she thought bitterly. Another woman who broke rules and still managed to capture Ridge's empathy. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about pride, about the invisible wound of being the daughter who was always left to clean up the mess while her father played the merciful patriarch. The argument that followed was not loud, but it was seismic. Ridge insisted that forgiveness was not endorsement, that recognizing Luna's talent did not mean reopening old doors. Steffy countered with cold logic sharpened by emotion. Every time Forrester allowed sentiment to dictate policy, it invited chaos. She reminded him of how many times trust had been weaponized by designers, by lovers, by family. "You can't protect everyone," she wanted to say, "and every time you try, it's me who ends up protecting you." But she didn't speak it aloud. The words hung in the silence, too heavy for even her to voice. That night, the Forrester mansion felt colder than usual. The portraits of Eric and Stephanie seemed to watch over their descendants with the unspoken disappointment of ghosts. Steffi poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Finn had tried to talk her down earlier, to remind her that rage and fear were rarely good business partners, but he didn't understand. For him, moral balance was a matter of logic. For Steffi, it was survival. Every scandal at Forrester was personal. Every betrayal, a knife drawn from her own family's bloodline. Luna's possible return wasn't just about a designer coming back. It was about history repeating itself, about losing control of the empire her family had nearly died to build. Meanwhile, across town, Ridge sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. The city lights shimmered through the window, casting fracture reflections across the framed photographs of his family. He thought of Steffy's words, of her conviction, and of the quiet fury that had glimmered behind her eyes. He admired her strength, but feared what it was turning her into. The industry had hardened her, carved out parts of her soul that used to be soft. He wondered if he had done that to her, if decades of conflict between his heart and his duty had taught her that love was weakness. Luna's name had only been a spark. What burned now was much deeper, something that had been smoldering for years. As the rumor gained traction, the media began to stir. Fashion blogs speculated about Luna's potential comeback. Some even romanticized her downfall, calling her a phoenix waiting to rise. Investors whispered about the publicity value of redemption. The public, fickle as always, was ready for a spectacle. Forrester Creations, once again, found itself at the center of scandalous intrigue. And Steffy, realizing that silence would only make things worse, decided to take control of the narrative. She called a board meeting, inviting Ridge, Thomas, Hope, and Carter. Her plan was simple: to draw the line publicly before Luna even had a chance to step through the door. The tension in the boardroom was palpable. Steffy presented her case with precision. Luna's association with Forrester Creations had to be officially terminated. Any contracts, royalties, or designs connected to her name should be frozen. She cited the company's image, their investors' confidence, and the need to protect their brand integrity. It was a flawless argument on paper, but everyone in the room could feel that this was not about business. This was about family. Ridge listened, arms crossed, the faintest flicker of pain crossing his expression. When she finished, he leaned forward, his voice measured but firm. "You're not wrong," he said, "but you're not right either. The world doesn't need another scandal. We need healing, not exile." Thomas, always the quiet observer in these family wars, shifted in his chair. He had his own history with redemption, and though he didn't dare say it aloud, he empathized with Luna more than anyone else did. Hope's eyes darted between father and daughter, sensing that something far larger was at play than corporate politics. Carter, as usual, tried to mediate, but his words barely broke through the tension. By the end of the meeting, no decision had been reached. The Forrester family, once united by creativity and blood, was now split along the familiar fault lines of pride and forgiveness. The press caught wind of the internal conflict within days. Forrester Civil War. One headline read. The phrase spread quickly, and soon, what had begun as a rumor about Luna became a narrative about Steffy versus Ridge, a daughter challenging the very man who had built the empire she now defended. Brooke, never one to resist a moment of poetic irony, watched from the sidelines with a mix of sympathy and satisfaction. She had once been the wedge between Ridge and the world. Now, that role belonged to his daughter. Steffy's fury deepened as the days went on. Ridge's refusal to take a hard stance felt like betrayal, but what hurt more was his quiet belief that Luna still deserved a second chance. It wasn't about the company anymore, it was about love, about the one thing Steffy could never control. She told herself she hated Luna because she was dangerous, but deep down, she hated the reflection Luna forced her to see, the possibility that compassion could exist even after failure, that mistakes didn't define a person forever. Steffy couldn't accept that truth because it would unravel the identity she had built. The perfectionist daughter, the unbreakable leader, the woman who never faltered. When Ridge finally invited Luna for a private conversation, purely professional, he claimed, Steffy's composure cracked. She stormed into the office mid-meeting, her presence slicing through the air like glass. Luna, pale but poised, rose from her chair. There was a brief moment when their eyes met, and the years of resentment between them condensed into silence. Luna didn't look defiant. She looked tired. She spoke softly, admitting her mistakes, saying she didn't expect forgiveness, only a chance to make things right. But Steffi heard none of it. In her mind, every word was manipulation. Ridge tried to mediate, but it was no use. The confrontation spiraled into an emotional clash of ideologies, Steffi's obsession with order against Ridge's belief in redemption. The argument ended when Steffi declared that if Luna returned to Forrester, she would resign. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ridge said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Steffi walked out, her heels striking the floor like gunfire, her chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. For the next few weeks, the company operated in uneasy limbo. Luna, now under Ridge's mentorship, began designing again, quietly, away from the cameras. Her sketches were raw, emotional, and hauntingly beautiful. Even Thomas couldn't deny her talent. Steffi, on the other hand, focused on her own division, channeling her anger into perfection. Every success was a statement, every collection a weapon. But the strain was visible. Finn worried about her, but Steffi refused to slow down. She couldn't afford to. To pause would mean feeling the full weight of her father's perceived betrayal. The breaking point came during the Forrester Winter Gala. The event was meant to symbolize unity, but the tension beneath the glittering surface was unmistakable. Ridge gave a heartfelt speech about family, about learning to forgive. And then, to everyone's shock, he unveiled Luna's new collection, designed in secret, in collaboration with Thomas. The audience erupted in applause. But Steffi stood frozen, her wine glass trembling in her hand. It wasn't just the betrayal of being kept in the dark, it was the sight of her family celebrating the one person she had fought so hard to banish. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Steffi confronted her father backstage. The words they exchanged would become the stuff of family legend, rage, tears, confessions. Ridge accused her of losing sight of compassion. She accused him of losing sight of loyalty. Neither could win because both were right in their own way. Luna, unaware of the storm she had reignited, slipped quietly out of the building, the sound of their voices echoing behind her like ghosts. In the weeks that followed, the Forrester Civil War deepened. Departments took sides. Designers whispered about shifting loyalties. Investors began to worry. What had started as a rumor about Luna had become an existential question about what Forrester Creations truly stood for: legacy or forgiveness, perfection or humanity. Ridge believed a brand without compassion was hollow. Steffi believed compassion without discipline was chaos. They were two sides of the same mirror, unable to see that both were reflections of the same fear, the fear of losing control. The irony, of course, was that Luna never sought to destroy Forrester. She only wanted to rebuild her life. But her presence, her very existence, forced the family to confront everything they had buried beneath decades of glamour and power. She became the catalyst for truths that had long been ignored, that love could wound as deeply as betrayal, that legacy could imprison as much as it could inspire. By the time spring arrived, the feud had left its scars. Ridge and Steffi spoke again, eventually, but something between them had changed. There was respect, but also distance. Forrester Creation survived as it always did, not because of unity, but because of resilience. Luna continued to design quietly, her collections infused with the melancholy beauty of someone who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. And Steffi, ever the warrior, learned to live with her contradictions. In private moments, she would stand by the window of her office, watching the city lights flicker like